Midway through my presentation to the State Rural Development Authority, the radiator hissed and sputtered like it always did in January. 7 committee members sat watching me explain water flow calculations I'd refined over 42 years. The room smelled of burnt coffee and wet wool from coats piled by the door. Wind rattled the windows. Blizzard warning since morning. My wife stood up. "These methods are dangerous," Diane said. "They haven't been updated since the 1970s. The room went silent. My face burned. Grandfather's brass compass in my pocket suddenly felt heavy as a stone. "Modern water volume requires current engineering standards," she continued, addressing the committee like I wasn't there. Catherine Holder, the lead evaluator, designer glasses, catching the fluorescent light, stopped writing. Watched Diane with an expression I couldn't read, then looked at me. "Mr. Brennan, can you explain your elevation gradient calculations?" I answered, using grandfather's method. Fluent, precise. Diane cut in. "I'll provide written documentation." Catherine's pen hovered over her notepad. "We'll need site verification. Both of you should attend." The night before the presentation, I worked at my drafting table in the barn office. The wood stove ticked as it cooled. Outside, temperature dropping towards 0, I could hear my breath in the spaces between the stoves settling. Grandfather's compass sat beside my hand, brass-worn smooth where his thumb had rested for 35 years before mine. I was laying out preliminary survey points for the water management system, the way I always did. Paper first, then digital. Check the math by hand before trusting the computer. The door opened. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of Diane's perfume, something expensive she'd started wearing to business meetings. "You're still working on that?" She didn't take off her coat. "Final review?" I didn't look up. 3 more calculations and I'd have the elevation gradient locked. She moved to the drafting table, stood too close. "It's too technical, Walter. The committee wants vision, not details." "The details are the vision." I marked the final point. "If the gradient's wrong by half a degree, the whole system fails." "They're not engineers. They're bureaucrats with a budget." Her voice had that edge it got lately. Sharp, dismissive. "You need to talk about community impact, economic development, job creation, and I need to talk about whether the water flows uphill or down." She exhaled, that particular sigh that meant I was being difficult. "This is why you need me tomorrow. Someone has to translate your technical obsessions into language decision-makers understand." I set down my pencil. The compass caught the lamplight. "I've been presenting to committees for 42 years. And how many million-dollar contracts have you won?" She picked up one of my preliminary drawings, studied it like she understood the notation. She didn't. "The world's changed, Walter. It's not enough to be competent anymore. You have to sell it." My jaw tightened. Outside, wind scraped branches against the barn siding. I'll handle the opening remarks tomorrow," she said. Not a question. Set context. "Then you cover the technical section?" I wanted to say no. Wanted to tell her this was my proposal, my methodology, my 42 years of knowing how water moves through soil. But she was already heading for the door. "Get some sleep," she said. "Big day tomorrow." The door closed. The stove ticked. I sat there with grandfather's compass in my palm, still warm from my hand. Morning came cold and bright. The county extension building parking lot was half full when we arrived, separately. Diane had left early, said she wanted to review materials. I'd watched her drive away with 3 file boxes I'd packed the night before. Inside, the building smelled like industrial floor cleaner and old coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The presentation room had folding chairs arranged in rows, a projection screen at the front, the state seal on the wall behind it. I was setting up my laptop when I noticed Tom Vickers in the back row, retired county engineer, hadn't seen him in 6 months. He caught my eye, nodded once. Something about that nod felt deliberate, but I couldn't read it. The committee filed in, 7 people in business casual, carrying notebooks and coffee cups. They took seats at the long table facing the projection screen. Then Catherine Holder arrived. She was maybe 60, silver-streaked hair pulled back, glasses that probably cost more than my truck payment. She moved with the kind of certainty that comes from being unquestionably right about complicated things for several decades. "Walter Brennan?" She extended her hand. "Catherine Holder, State Rural Development Authority, lead evaluator for infrastructure contracts." Her grip was firm. Her hands had calluses, not office hands. "Tom Vickers speaks highly of your work," she said. Glanced at Tom in the back row. He shifted in his seat. "Known Tom a long time." I was trying to place how they knew each other. "Me too." She moved to her seat at the head of the committee table. "Looking forward to seeing this methodology I've heard about." Diane appeared then, working the room, shaking hands with committee members, laughing at something someone said. Professional networking mode. She was good at it, always had been. making people comfortable, building rapport, smoothing social friction. She moved to stand beside me at the front, leaned in close, voice low. Let me start. Establish context. You just focus on the technical details. The room was settling. Catherine Holder had her pen ready, notebook open. I should have said no. Should have trusted my own voice to carry my own work. Instead, I hesitated. Looked at Diane's confident expression. Thought about 42 years of presenting in rooms exactly like this one, and how tired I suddenly felt. All right, I said. She smiled, stepped forward. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. Diane opened with community impact statistics I'd never seen before. Job creation projections, economic multiplier effects. The committee members nodded along, taking notes. Then she gestured to the first slide, my elevation gradient map. As you can see, the proposed system addresses critical water management needs. I waited for her to hand it over. Let me walk them through the methodology. She didn't. She kept going. Talking about stakeholder engagement, public-private partnerships, sustainability metrics, corporate language that sounded impressive and meant nothing. The kind of presentation you'd give if you'd skimmed the executive summary but never actually done the work. I shifted in my seat. The metal folding chair creaked. Catherine Holder was watching Diane carefully. Not writing, just watching. 10 minutes in, Diane pulled up my survey benchmark diagram. Started explaining water flow patterns using terms she'd clearly memorized but didn't understand. Hydraulic gradient optimization paired with stakeholder-centered methodology. That's when I realized she'd never planned to let me present at all. I stood. Maybe I should... These methods are dangerous, Diane said. Didn't look at me. Addressed the committee directly. They haven't been updated since the 1970s. The radiator hissed. Someone coughed. Chairs stopped scraping. My face went hot. Grandfather's compass was a weight in my pocket. I appreciate Walter's dedication, she continued, voice gentle, reasonable, like she was protecting them from something. But the reality is, his approach lacks modern safety protocols. Current engineering standards require more sophisticated modeling. That's not... I started. She talked over me. Modern water volume patterns, climate change considerations, EPA compliance frameworks. These are areas where Walter's traditional methods simply can't provide the assurance you need. The room smelled like sweat suddenly. Mine, probably. My hands were trembling. Tom Vickers sat forward in the back row. His jaw was tight. Catherine Holder set down her pen. Mrs. Brennan, you mentioned traditional methods. Can you specify which aspects of the proposed system concern you? The hydraulic gradient calculations, primarily, Diane said without hesitation. The baseline assumptions don't account for variable precipitation patterns. Catherine's expression didn't change. Mr. Brennan, can you explain your elevation gradient calculations, the methodology behind them? My throat was dry. It's based on direct site measurement. I survey the property with a transit, establish benchmarks every 100 feet, calculate flow rates based on seasonal water table variations and soil permeability. The method was developed by Lloyd Masterson in the 1950s, refined over decades. My grandfather... I'll provide written documentation, Diane interrupted, smiled at Catherine. The technical specifications can be rather dense without proper context. Catherine looked at Diane for a long moment, then wrote something in her notebook, 3 lines, underlined twice. We'll need site verification, Catherine said. Field assessment of the proposed location. Both of you should attend. She closed her notebook. This evaluation will require additional review. The meeting ended. Committee members filed out quickly, uncomfortable. Not meat in my eyes. The parking lot was emptying. Snow swirled in the wind, temperature dropping. I stood by my truck, hands shaking too hard to get the key in the lock. Diane came out 5 minutes later, alone now, the professional smile gone. What the hell was that? My voice came out raw. That was me protecting the business. She pulled her coat tighter. Your reputation is becoming a liability, Walter. I built that reputation over 42 years. And you're coasting on it instead of adapting. She moved toward her car. The world's changed. You haven't. Tom Vickers appeared then, walking from the building, put his hand on my shoulder, said nothing, just stood there while Diane drove away. Call me tonight, he said quietly, then left. I finally got my truck door open, sat in the cab, engine running, heat blasting. My hands were still shaking. That's when I saw the receipt. It was on the passenger floor mat. Must have fallen from Diane's coat pocket when she'd borrowed my truck last week. Business card paper, folded once. I picked it up, read it twice to make sure I was understanding correctly. Whitmore and Associates, Family Law. $3,500 retainer, client consultation fee. Dated 3 weeks ago, January 8th. 3 weeks before she humiliated me in front of the State Rural Development Authority. The truck cab suddenly felt too small. Too hot. I couldn't breathe right. My phone was in my hand before I consciously decided to use it. I dialed the number printed at the bottom of the receipt. Whitmore and Associates. Professional voice. Polite. What kind of law firm is this? A pause. We specialize in family law. Divorce proceedings, asset division, custody arrangements. Can I direct your call? I hung up. Sat there with the engine idling and snow accumulating on the windshield. 3 weeks of planning. 3 weeks of meetings with divorce attorneys while we ate breakfast together every morning, while she reviewed my proposal documents. While she said, "We're in this together." The receipt was still in my hand. My wedding ring caught the dashboard light. 42 years of surveying, 28 years of marriage, and I'd never seen this coming. I didn't sleep. Spent the night at the barn office with the divorce receipt on my desk and grandfather's compass beside it. The wood stove burned down to coals. Outside, temperature dropped to single digits. Wind found every gap in the barn siding. Tom called at 7 in the morning. "Riverside Diner," he said. 30 minutes. The diner smelled like coffee and bacon grease and decades of absorbed breakfast conversation. Red vinyl booths, laminated menus sticky from use. The morning crowd was already in. Farmers mostly. Couples sitting in comfortable silence over eggs and toast. Tom was in the back booth. 2 coffees already on the table. I slid in across from him. My hands wrapped around the mug. Still couldn't get warm. "You found something," Tom said. Not a question. I pulled out the receipt, pushed it across the table. He looked at it, didn't seem surprised. 3 weeks before the presentation. "You knew." Not about the divorce attorney, but I knew something was wrong. He took a sip of coffee, set it down carefully. "Catherine Holder didn't come here randomly." "What do you mean?" "State sends her for contested evaluations. When there's questions about authenticity, competence, fraud." He glanced toward the window. February morning, gray light, dirty snow piled in the parking lot. "She's their specialist. Technical background. Engineering degree. Worked in the field for 20 years before moving into evaluation." My chest tightened. So Diane's attack worked. They're questioning my... "No." Tom leaned forward. "Walter, Catherine wasn't taking notes on your presentation. She was taking notes on Diane." The diner sounds, silverware on plates, low conversations, coffee pouring, seemed to fade out. "I've seen this before," Tom said quietly. "Different company, different town. Engineer's wife claimed she'd co-developed his work during their divorce. Used it to argue for asset division. The evaluation process caught her lying." "Oh." "Catherine was taking notes on Diane," I repeated slowly. "Catherine asked you that technical question. You answered it perfectly, fluent, like breathing." Tom's voice was steady, factual. "Then she asked Diane to provide written documentation. That wasn't a request, that was a test." I thought about Catherine's expression, the way she'd watched Diane talk, the 3 lines she'd written, underlined twice. "How do you know all this?" "I worked with Catherine's mentor back in the 80s, man named Lloyd Masterson." Tom waited for the name to land. It hit like a fist to the chest. "Lloyd was your mentor too," Tom said. "Taught you surveying when you were 23, fresh out of school. He taught Catherine around the same time, different county." He paused. "She recognized your methodology the second she saw it. Because it's Lloyd's methodology. The Masterson method." The coffee mug was warm against my palms. The diner smelled like home. Like 42 years of morning meetings with engineers who knew the difference between people who talked about work and people who did it. "That nod you gave me during the presentation," what I said. Tom smiled slightly. "I recognized Catherine when she walked in. Knew she'd see through whatever game Diane was playing." His expression turned serious. "But Walter, the site visit she's scheduled, that's your chance. Show her the actual work. Let her see you do what Diane can only describe." "What if Diane's right? What if I am outdated?" "You walked the Anderson property boundary dispute in 2019. 3 other surveyors said it couldn't be resolved without litigation. You found the original survey markers from 1947, hand-measured every inch of that quarter-mile line, proved the fence was 8 feet over." Tom's voice was firm. "Settlement closed in 2 weeks. Saved both families $50,000 in legal fees. That outdated enough for you?" A waitress refilled our coffee. The sound of it pouring was the most normal thing that had happened in 24 hours. "Lloyd used to say competence is quiet," Tom said. "Fraud is loud." After breakfast, I drove to the county clerk's office. The building was old brick, heated by radiators that clanged and hissed. The hallway smelled like old paper and floor wax. Nora Chen was at her desk when I walked in. She'd worked there 15 years. I'd helped her family with a property line issue back when she was just starting. Boundary confusion after her parents bought their place. Never charged them. Just walked the line one Saturday afternoon. Found the original survey stakes buried under 40 years of leaf litter. "Walter." She looked up from her computer, Smiled, but it faded when she saw my face. You look terrible. Need to pull some permit files? Which ones? Everything filed under Diane Brennan's name in the past 6 months. Her smile disappeared entirely. She didn't ask why, just typed, pulled up records, printed them. 3 permits, all for projects I designed, all listing Diane as principal engineer. I spread them across her counter, read through the technical specifications. The first one had the elevation gradient inverted, water would flow backward. The second showed benchmarks positioned in locations I'd never surveyed, coordinates that didn't match the actual topography. The third had calculations for soil permeability that were physically impossible, clay soil with the drainage rate of sand. Walter, Nora's voice was careful. These permits, if the state reviews them and finds these errors, the contract gets invalidated, I finished. She nodded slowly. Your wife requested copies of all your original survey records last month. Said it was for archival purposes, business documentation. My hands were shaking again, not from cold this time. She's building a paper trail, I said, making herself look like a co-developer. Except she doesn't understand the work well enough to fake it correctly. Nora looked at the permits. Walter, I could file an amendment. Correct these before? No. The word came out harder than I intended. Leave them exactly as they are. She studied my face. What are you planning? I'm planning to let the truth speak for itself. Outside, February wind rattled the old windows. Ice was starting to melt from the courthouse roof. I could hear it dripping. The sound of winter beginning its slow surrender to spring. The site visit was scheduled for the last week of January. Another storm rolled in the night before. Ice warning, roads treacherous. Catherine's office called that morning. Ms. Holder insists on proceeding, the assistant said. Weather permitting. Weather wasn't permitting, but I drove out anyway. The proposed site was 12 acres of floodplain land north of town. I'd surveyed it 3 times already, once in each season to understand how the water table shifted. The ground was frozen solid now, snow cover hiding the terrain, temperature in the teens, wind cutting through layers. Catherine arrived in a county vehicle, 2 junior evaluators with her, proper boots, field coats, they looked ready for actual work. Diane pulled up 10 minutes later in her sedan, got out wearing heels and a wool coat better suited for office buildings than frozen farmland. She looked at the snow-covered field like it had personally offended her. Mrs. Brennan? Catherine's voice was neutral, professional. Can you show us where you'd place the primary catchment basin? Diane's smile was tight. I'll need to reference the site map. The map's in your vehicle? The detailed specifications are at the office. This visit was scheduled rather quickly. Catherine made a note, didn't comment. Mr. Brennan? I pulled grandfather's compass from my coat pocket. The brass was cold enough to burn. I oriented to the section markers I'd placed in November, survey stakes with my personal chisel mark, still visible above the snow line. Primary basin goes here, and I walked 50 feet northeast, reading the terrain beneath the snow the way you read Braille. Elevation drops 3 feet over the next 100 yards. Natural drainage pattern follows this depression, and I traced the invisible line with my hand. Secondary retention pond 200 feet east, catches overflow during spring melt. Catherine followed, took her own compass reading, checked it against her notes. The junior evaluators photographed the survey stakes. In the benchmark calculations? Catherine asked. I explained the elevation gradient. Used the same method Lloyd Masterson had taught me 42 years ago, the same method he'd taught Catherine. She knew. I could see it in her eyes, recognition. Mrs. Brennan. Catherine turned. Can you explain the hydraulic flow assumptions for this gradient? Diane tried. Corporate language. Stakeholder alignment protocols. Integrated watershed management frameworks. Words that sounded technical without meaning anything specific. Catherine's junior evaluators exchanged glances. The Masterson method, Catherine said quietly, almost to herself, then to me. Could I speak with you privately, Mr. Brennan? Diane's face tightened. I should be part of any technical discussions. This will just take a moment. Catherine walked toward the tree line. I followed. The wind was sharp enough to cut. Our breath made clouds. Behind us, Diane stood alone on the frozen field, heels sinking into snow. Your wife filed a co-developer claim with the state 3 weeks ago. Catherine's voice was low, clinical. Legal document asserting joint intellectual property rights to the methodology used in this proposal. The cold suddenly felt internal. What? She's claiming she co-developed the surveying approach, that it constitutes community property created during your marriage. Catherine watched my face. It positions her to claim contract rights in the event of marital dissolution. The frozen ground seemed to tilt. She filed for divorce. The claim specifically references potential dissolution proceedings. Protects her financial interest in any contracts awarded based on jointly developed intellectual property. Catherine paused. I've seen this twice before, Mr. Brennan. Spouse weaponizes professional work for asset division. My hands were numb, not from cold. The site visit wasn't just technical evaluation, she continued. I needed to document who actually understands this work, who can demonstrate competence versus who can only describe it. Behind us, Diane was talking on her phone, animated, angry. Your methodology, Catherine said. It's Lloyd Masterson's approach, isn't it? I nodded, couldn't trust my voice. He was my mentor too, 25 years ago. Something like sympathy crossed her face. I know whose work this is, and I will not let it be stolen. I drove home. Didn't remember the drive. Just found myself in the barn office as darkness fell. The life insurance policy was on my desk. I didn't remember putting it there. Must have pulled it from the file cabinet in some fugue state. Beneficiary change form. Signed 3 weeks ago. Primary beneficiary changed from Walter Brennan to Jennifer Caldwell, Diane's sister. The wealthy one. The one who'd been divorced twice with generous settlements. I opened the business bank account on my laptop. The internet was slow. The barn was cold. The wood stove had gone out hours ago. Transfer $47,000. From business operating account to account ending in 3847, Diane's personal account, dated January 12th. 2 weeks before the presentation, I kept searching, found more. Notes in Diane's handwriting. Photographed and stored in a shared drive I hadn't known existed. Masterson method. Il's community property. Consult Evelyn Re Precedent. W's reputation deteriorating. Position as technical liability. Contract assessed. Value $. 2M. 50%. Almost $600K minimum. The barn was dark now. No moon. Just snow falling past the window, visible against the security light mounted on the corner post. 42 years I'd walked survey lines, measured boundaries, established truth through mathematics that didn't lie, trusted that precision mattered. That competence spoke for itself. 28 years of marriage. 28 years of breakfast conversations and shared tax returns and saying we instead of I. And she'd been planning this for months. Maybe longer. The divorce attorney receipt was still in my wallet, the insurance change form on my desk, the bank transfer on my screen, the handwritten notes with their cold arithmetic, her handwriting, her calculations. 50% of $1.2 million. I sat in the dark with grandfather's compass in my hand. The brass was cold now, the weight of it familiar, the only solid thing in a world that had turned to ice. Outside, snow kept falling, silent, relentless, bearing everything. 42 years. She was erasing 42 years. Pastor Mike showed up at the barn office 2 days later. I hadn't called him. I hadn't told anyone what I'd found. But small towns work like that. Someone sees your truck parked at the barn, 3 nights running, lights on until dawn. Word spreads. He knocked. Didn't wait for an answer. Came in carrying 2 paper cups of coffee from the gas station. The barn smelled like cold metal and old wood. My breath was visible. Stove's out, he said. I haven't gotten around to it. He set the coffee down. Started loading wood into the stove. Crumpled newspaper, kindling. His movements were practiced, methodical. He'd grown up farming before he felt the call to ministry. The match caught. Fire spread. Within minutes, heat began pushing back the cold. I married you two, he said finally. 28 years ago, June wedding. You were so nervous you forgot the ring in your truck. Had to send your brother running to get it. I didn't say anything. Just wrapped my hands around the coffee cup. It was lukewarm. Tasted like cardboard. Best thing I'd had in days. Community's talking, Mike continued. Some say Diane's protecting the business from your outdated methods. Others say she's trying to steal something that was never hers. He sat down across from me. Most don't know what to think. What do you think? I think you look like a man who's discovered his marriage ended months ago, and he's the last to know. His voice was gentle. I think you're sitting here wondering if 42 years of work matters. If the person who shared your life wants to erase it. The fire crackled. Outside, ice was dripping from the barn roof. February giving way to March, not spring yet, but the sound of winter surrendering. She filed for divorce, I said. First time I'd spoken it aloud. I heard. Church secretary saw the filing at the courthouse. He sipped his coffee, made a face at the taste, but kept drinking. Also heard Catherine Holders asking questions about who actually developed the surveying methodology. That true? I nodded. Then you've got a choice to make, Walter. You can let this destroy you. Sink into bitterness. Make this about revenge. He paused. Or you can stand up and tell the truth. Not because it hurts Diane, because it's true. What if the truth isn't enough? The truth is always enough, just not always fast enough for our liking. He stood, walked to the window. Your work speaks for itself, has for 4 decades. Anyone who's paid attention knows that. The question is whether you're willing to defend it. My throat was tight. I don't know if I have it in me. That's grief talking, not truth. He turned back. You saved 3 farms from boundary disputes. Remember that? Weavers and Holcombs and the Chen place. Could have gone to litigation. Years of lawyer fees. You walked those lines for free. Found the original markers. Proved the truth with mathematics that don't lie. I remembered. All of it. The satisfaction of finding century-old survey stakes buried under decades of growth. The handshake agreements. The families staying neighbors instead of becoming enemies. That's who you are, Mike said. Man who measures twice. Man who checks the math. Man who doesn't lie even when it's easier. His voice was firm now. Don't let Diane Brennan make you forget that. After he left, I sat by the stove. The fire was warm. The barn was warming. Outside, the dripping continued. Faster now. Spring melt beginning. Tom called, that afternoon. You free? 20 minutes later, we were back at the Riverside Diner. Different booth, same coffee. Catherine's going to need documentation, Tom said. Proof that your methodology predates your marriage. That it's not something Diane co-developed. It's Lloyd's method. He taught me in... I stopped. 1982, 4 years before I married Diane. Can you prove that? I thought about it. County records, my early survey work. It's all filed at the clerk's office. Already got them. Tom pulled out a manila folder. Asked Nora to pull everything from 1982 to 1985. Your name's all over the original surveys. Age 23. Working under Lloyd Masterson's supervision. He slid the folder across. Predates your marriage by 4 years. The documents were yellowed, decades old. But the signatures were clear, my handwriting from when I was young, Lloyd's supervision notes in the margins. There's something else you need, Tom said. Lloyd's original field notebooks, the ones your grandfather gave him. Then Lloyd gave them back to you after your grandfather died. My chest tightened. I haven't looked at those in 20 years. Where are they? Barn, somewhere. Loft, maybe. Grandfather's old surveying kit. Find them. Tom's voice was urgent. Catherine's going to ask how you learned this method. Those notebooks prove the lineage. Prove it's not corporate methodology that could be argued as community property. It's family knowledge. Generational. The coffee was cold. Outside the diner window, March rain was starting. Not snow, rain. The sound of it on the pavement was different than snow. Sharper, more insistent. Final evaluation scheduled for April 10th, Tom said. Catherine will make her recommendation to the committee then. You've got 5 weeks to prove your case. And if I can't? Then Diane wins, gets her co-developer claim recognized, takes half the contract, takes half your business. He met my eyes. Builds her career on work she never did, and nobody stops her from doing it again. I thought about the barn loft. 20 years of accumulated equipment and forgotten storage. Grandfather's old surveying kit buried somewhere in that history. I'll find the notebooks, I said. Word spread fast, small towns work like that. By the second week of March, everyone knew Walter and Diane Brennan were heading for divorce. Everyone had an opinion. I heard it at the hardware store, at the gas station. Everywhere except the place it mattered most, the Riverside Diner. The diner was where reputations lived and died, where public opinion formed over coffee and eggs. I'd been avoiding it, until Tom said I couldn't anymore. You don't show up, they assume you're guilty, he said. Assume Diane's right, that you're some outdated relic who can't adapt. So I went. The breakfast crowd was in full swing. Farmers at the counter, retirees in the booths, the smell of bacon and burnt coffee, and 40 years of absorbed conversations. The sound of silverware on plates, low voices, the door chime every time someone entered. I took a booth in the corner, tried to disappear, didn't work. Bill Weaver, whose property line I'd settled in 2019, stopped by, shook my hand. Don't believe what some folks are saying. Your work saved my farm from litigation. I remember. But Carolyn Ames, who ran the real estate office, gave me a tight smile from across the room. She'd been at one of Diane's concerned community member meetings. I'd heard about those. Diane hosting coffee gatherings, explaining how she'd been trying to modernize the business, how I was being stubborn, resistant to change, how the state contract was at risk because I couldn't adapt to current standards. The younger crowd, professionals who'd moved to town in the past decade, seemed to believe her. The modernization narrative made sense to people who valued polish over substance, performance over competence. The older generation, the ones who'd worked alongside me for decades, knew better. But that meant the town was splitting, right down the middle. I was on my second cup of coffee when the door opened and my son walked in. Mark, 35 years old. Hadn't spoken to him in 3 years. Not since the argument about whether I should sell the family land to a developer. He'd said I was being sentimental, impractical. That land was an investment, not a legacy. He'd moved to Columbus after that, sent cards at Christmas, kept his distance. Now he was scanning the diner, saw me. His jaw was set the way it got when he'd already decided I was wrong. He slid into the booth across from me without asking. Mom called, he said. I figured. She says you're being impossible, that you're risking $1 million contract because you won't accept feedback. Mark's voice had that edge, the one that came from Diane's side of the family. Impatient, certain. She says the state's questioning your competence. I set down my coffee, carefully. Did she mention the divorce attorney she hired 3 weeks before the presentation? Or the co-developer claim? Or the $47,000 she transferred from the business account? His expression flickered. She's protecting her interests. By stealing mine. It's not stealing if you built it together. I built it 4 years before I met her. My voice was level, quiet. I built it working under Lloyd Masterson, learning methods my grandfather developed in the 1940s. Your mother was a dental hygienist when we married. She's never surveyed a property, never calculated an elevation gradient, never walked a boundary line. She handled the business side, the client relations, the paperwork. Yes, that's not the same as co-developing the methodology. I pulled out the divorce attorney receipt, slid it across the table. 3 weeks before she humiliated me in front of the state authority. 3 weeks of planning. He looked at the receipt, didn't pick it up. You've always been difficult to work with, he said finally. Maybe she had reasons. He stood up, left without finishing the conversation. The diner had gone quiet, everyone watching, everyone forming opinions. I sat there with the receipt between us. Cold coffee, cold morning, the sound of rain starting outside. March rain, the kind that washes away the last of winter. My phone rang. Nora Chin. Walter, you need to come to the office, now. Nora had 3 permit applications spread across her desk, the ones filed under Diane's name. A calculator beside them. Her face was tight with something between anger and disbelief. I ran the calculations, she said. All of them. Every single specification in these permits. And? They're wrong. Not just wrong, impossible. She pointed to the first permit. This elevation gradient. It's inverted, water would flow uphill. This benchmark, she tapped the second permit, is positioned in a location you've never surveyed. I checked the county records. You were documented at a different site on this date. Diane claims she conducted this survey, but you're the only licensed surveyor in your company. My hands were shaking again. Not fear this time, something closer to vindication. In this one, Nora pulled up the third permit. Soil permeability calculations. She's listing clay soil with the drainage rate of pure sand. Physically impossible. Anyone with basic engineering knowledge would catch this. Tom arrived then. Nora must have called him too. He studied the permits, cross-referenced them with county records. Timeline inconsistencies, he said. She claims to have conducted surveys on dates when only you were on site. Claims to have developed specifications that contain fundamental errors no actual engineer would make. She doesn't understand the work, I said slowly. She memorized enough technical language to sound competent, but she can't actually do it. Performance versus substance, Tom said. Fraud is loud. Competence is quiet. Nora pulled up more files. There's something else. She requested copies of all your original survey records last month. Said it was for archival purposes. But look at the dates she accessed them. She turned her monitor. Same week she filed those fraudulent permits, she was studying your methodology, trying to replicate it, getting it wrong because she doesn't understand the foundational principles. My phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Brennan, this is Catherine Holder. I need to schedule a final evaluation meeting, April 10th, County Extension Building. I'll need you to bring documentation of your methodology's origins, every piece of evidence you have. I'll be there. One more thing. Her voice was careful, professional. Your wife filed an amended co-developer claim last week. She's now asserting that she actively contributed to technical development throughout your marriage. She's provided permit applications as evidence. The permits spread across Nora's desk, the ones with impossible calculations. Diane's own incompetence, documented in official county records. I'm aware of those permits, I said. Good, because I'll be reviewing them. Along with your original survey work, timeline documentation, everything. She paused. Mr. Brennan, I trained under Lloyd Masterson in 1985. I recognize his methodology when I see it, and I recognize when someone's claiming credit for work they don't understand. The line went dead. Outside, March rain was falling harder. The sound of it on the county building windows was steady, insistent, washing away ice, washing away winter. Tom looked at me. 5 weeks until final evaluation. I need to find grandfather's field notebooks. Tonight, Nora said. Find them tonight. Because Catherine just gave you the opening you need, and Diane just gave you the evidence to close the trap. The barn loft was cold, late March, but winter still clung to the shadows. I climbed the ladder as rain drummed on the metal roof above. Not snow anymore, rain. The sound was different, sharper, more insistent. 20 years of accumulated storage up here. Equipment I'd replaced but couldn't throw away. Survey markers, transit cases, boxes of field notes dating back to when I was 23. Somewhere in this mess was grandfather's old surveying kit. I found it behind a stack of wooden stakes. Leather case, cracked with age. The brass buckles tarnished. I opened it. Transit pieces wrapped in cloth. Spare compass parts. And beneath them, wrapped in oilcloth, 5 leather-bound field notebooks, 1947 to 1982. Grandfather's handwriting. Precise, methodical. Every survey documented with measurements, sketches, calculations. The same methodology I'd learned. The same methodology Lloyd Masterson had refined. The same methodology Catherine Holder recognized. I opened the first notebook. 1947, grandfather's early work, hand-drawn elevation maps. Benchmark calculations done with a slide rule, checked twice, verified 3 times. The methodology was already there, fully formed, proven. I climbed down the ladder. Brought the notebooks to the drafting table. Opened them under the lamplight. Rain kept falling. The stove was warm. The barn smelled like old leather and wood smoke and 40 years of careful work. My hands were shaking, not from cold, from what I was considering. I could offer Diane partial credit. Let her have the co-developer claim. Save the marriage. Split the contract. Keep the peace. Maybe she'd drop the divorce if I gave her what she wanted. 28 years of shared mornings, shared tax returns, shared life. Was this methodology, this work, worth losing all of that? The door opened. Pastor Mike. Again. Without calling first, like he knew I needed someone to stop me from making a mistake. He looked at the notebooks spread across the table. At my face. Said nothing for a long minute. You're thinking about giving her what she wants, he said finally. I'm thinking about whether truth is worth the cost. Truth doesn't have a cost. Lies do. He moved to the stove, held his hands to the warmth. You let this lie stand, Walter. What happens to the next surveyor whose spouse tries the same thing? What precedent does that set? I'm not responsible for... Yes, you are. The moment you have the power to stop it and choose not to. His voice was firm. This isn't about you and Diane anymore. It's about whether competence matters, whether truth matters, whether 42 years of honest work can be erased by someone who memorized enough jargon to sound credible. Rain hammered harder, the roof sang with it. Some battles you fight for yourself, Mike continued. This one's bigger. You let Diane steal this? Next time it'll be easier. Next person won't have your documentation. Won't have Catherine Holder seeing through the fraud. Won't have Tom Vickers bringing evidence. And he turned to face me. You're not just defending your work. You're defending the idea that work matters at all. My throat was tight. It'll cost me my marriage. Your marriage ended the day she hired a divorce attorney and didn't tell you. His voice was gentle now. You're just finally accepting it. After he left, I sat with the notebooks, rain on the roof, fire in the stove, grandfather's handwriting before me, page after page of careful measurements, elevation calculations, benchmark positions, work that didn't lie, couldn't lie, mathematics that were either right or wrong with no room for performance. The first notebook had an inscription on the inside cover, fountain pen, faded but legible. To Walter, age 7, someday you'll walk these lines. Remember, measure twice, cut once. Truth is in the numbers. Love, Granddad. I hadn't cried in years, not at grandfather's funeral. Not when Dad lost the farm to eminent domain, not through any of it. I cried now. For 42 years of walking lines. For a marriage that had been over before I knew it was dying. For the choice between loneliness and lies. For the simple fact that sometimes winning means losing everything else. The door opened. Mark stood there, soaking wet, rain dripping from his jacket. He'd driven back from Columbus. 3 hours in the rain. He saw my face, saw the notebooks, saw his father crying over leather-bound field notes written before he was born. What are those? His voice was different than it had been at the diner. Quieter, uncertain. I couldn't speak. Just pushed the nearest notebook toward him. He picked it up, opened to a random page. 1953, survey of the Anderson property. The same property where I'd resolved the boundary dispute in 2019. Same benchmarks, same methodology, same careful handwriting. Documenting truth in measurements that didn't lie. This is Granddad's, Mark said slowly. I nodded, found my voice. 1947 to 1982, every survey he did, the methodology your mother claims we co-developed during our marriage. I opened another notebook. Look at the date. Look at whose land this was. He read, turned pages, his face changing as he understood what he was holding. This is the same method you use, and it's the same method Lloyd Masterson refined, the same method he taught me in 1982, 4 years before I married your mother. My voice was raw. It's not community property. It's not something we built together. It's family knowledge. Generational. Your great-grandfather's work, your grandfather's refinement, my inheritance. Mark kept reading, page after page, survey after survey, 42 years before I was born. Methodology proven and documented and passed down. He set the notebook down carefully, like it was something precious, fragile. Mom said she co-developed this? She filed a legal claim saying exactly that. But these notebooks, he gestured at them, spread across the table like evidence at a trial. They prove she's lying. Yes. Rain kept falling. The sound of it filled the silence between us. Spring rain, washing away the last of winter, washing away the lies we'd both believed. Dad, his voice cracked. I told you Mom had reasons. I said you were being difficult. He looked at his hands. I believed her. She's your mother. You're supposed to believe her. She's a liar. The words came out sharp, angry, hurt. She's stealing from you, from us, from... He picked up the 1947 notebook. From this, from Granddad's legacy. I didn't correct him. Didn't soften it. Just sat there, with 42 years of work, spread between us, and let him understand what his mother had become. Final evaluations April 10th, I said. Catherine Holder from the State Authority. She's going to ask for documentation, proof of methodology origins. Mark looked at the notebooks, at me, at the rain streaming down the barn windows. Then we bring these, he said. What was all of them? We show her exactly whose work this is. The we hit harder than anything else that night. My son, who'd been estranged for 3 years, who'd sided with his mother at the diner, who'd called me difficult and impossible and wrong, standing in the barn with rain falling and fire burning and grandfather's truth spread across the table between us. We, he said again, you're not doing this alone. April 10th arrived with spring rain, not the hard rain of March, gentle, steady. The sound of it on the county extension building windows was almost musical. Through the glass, I could see green emerging. First leaves, first grass, winter finally surrendering. The presentation room smelled like fresh coffee and floor cleaner and nervous sweat. The 7 committee members were already seated. Catherine Holder at the head of the table, leather portfolio open, pen ready. A state attorney sat beside her, thin woman with steel gray hair and an expression that gave nothing away. Tom Vickers was in his back row again, same seat as January. Beside him sat Pastor Mike, Nora Chen, 15 other community members who'd asked to observe. Bill Weaver, whose boundary dispute I'd settled. The Holcomb family, others whose land I'd surveyed over 4 decades. Mark sat in the corner, grandfather's 1947 field notebook open in his lap. He'd barely put it down in 3 weeks. Diane arrived last, professional suit, confident stride. She looked at the crowded room and something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe. Or the beginning of fear. She took the seat Catherine indicated, directly across from me. The table between us felt like a courtroom. This evaluation addresses technical competence and authorship claims related to the proposed rural water infrastructure project. Catherine's voice was formal, clinical. Specifically, the co-developer claim filed by Diane Brennan, asserting joint intellectual property rights to the surveying methodology. The rain kept falling. Robins were singing outside. Spring sounds, the sound of truth emerging. Mrs. Brennan, you've claimed co-development of the surveying approach used in this proposal. Can you identify the primary survey benchmarks on this site map? Catherine slid a document across the table. Diane studied it. Too long. Her finger traced the map uncertainly. The primary catchment basin would be positioned here, she said finally, pointed to a location. Based on stakeholder engagement protocols and integrated watershed management frameworks, Catherine made a note. That location is 40 feet from where Mr. Brennan proposed the basin. Can you explain the elevation gradient calculation that supports your position? The detailed specifications are in my files. The hydraulic flow assumptions account for variable precipitation patterns in EPA compliance frameworks. Corporate language, performance. The same deflection from January. Mr. Brennan, Catherine turned to me. Same question. I pulled grandfather's brass compass from my pocket. The brass was warm, worn smooth. I oriented to the map's coordinate system the way I'd done 10,000 times before. Primary basin goes here. I marked the position with absolute certainty. Elevation drops 3.2 feet over the next 100 yards. Natural drainage follows this depression based on topographic survey conducted November 15th. Secondary retention pond positions here. Elevation drop of 1.8 feet accounts for spring melt. Overflow based on 40-year precipitation data. I wasn't reading from notes. Wasn't guessing. This was knowledge. Lived experience. Mathematics that didn't lie. Catherine nodded once. That same recognition from the site visit. She knew. She'd always known. The methodology you're using, she said. Can you explain its origins? Lloyd Masterson developed the foundational approach in the 1950s, refining methods my grandfather pioneered in the 1940s. My voice was steady. I trained under Lloyd in 1982. I was 23, 4 years before my marriage. Tom stood in the back, moved forward, placed a folder on the table. County survey records, and he said, 1982 to 1985. Walter Brennan's early work under Lloyd Masterson's direct supervision predates his marriage by 4 years. And Catherine reviewed the documents. Yellowed paper, my young handwriting, Lloyd's supervision notes in the margins. The state attorney leaned forward, studied the dates, made her own notes. Mrs. Brennan, the attorney said, these records show Mr. Brennan was practicing this methodology independently before your marriage. How do you claim co-development of pre-existing intellectual property? Diane's composure cracked slightly. The business side. Client relations, permit applications. The work that made the technical methodology commercially viable? Nora Chen stood, walked to the front. She was trembling, but her voice was clear. I'm the county clerk. I maintain all permit and survey records. She placed 3 documents on the table. These are permit applications filed under Mrs. Brennan's name as principal engineer. All 3 contain fundamental technical errors. And she pointed to the first permit. Inverted elevation gradient. Water would flow uphill. Physically impossible. The second. Benchmark positions in locations never surveyed. I cross-referenced county access records. Only Mr. Brennan was documented on site on these dates. The third. Soil permeability calculations listing clay soil with sand drainage rates. Any trained engineer would recognize this as impossible. The room had gone completely silent. Even the rain seemed to pause. Additionally, Nora continued, timeline analysis shows Mrs. Brennan accessed Mr. Brennan's original survey records the same week she filed these permits. She was attempting to replicate methodology she doesn't understand. The errors prove she lacks foundational competence in the field she claims to have co-developed. Diane's face had gone pale. Those are preliminary drafts. Subject to revision. They're official permit applications filed with the county, Nora interrupted. Legally binding documents, submitted under your name, with your signature. Catherine turned to Diane. Can you explain the Masterson method's approach to benchmark positioning? Silence. Can you calculate a basic elevation gradient using transit readings? Diane opened her mouth, closed it. The corporate language was gone. The performance had failed. There was nothing left. I handled the business development, she said finally, quietly. The client relations. The strategic positioning that made the company successful. That's not the same as technical co-development. The state attorney's voice was cold. Co-developer claims require documented technical contribution. You've provided none. Mark stood in the back. Everyone turned. He walked to the front, carrying the 1947 field notebook like something sacred. He placed it on the table before the committee. My great-grandfather's field notebook, he said. 1947 to 1982, 35 years of survey work, the same methodology my father uses, the same methodology Lloyd Masterson refined, the same methodology my mother claims she co-developed, and he opened the notebook. Grandfather's handwriting, precise elevation calculations, hand-drawn survey maps, benchmark positions documented with measurements that didn't lie. Look at the dates, Mark said. His voice was shaking but determined. 1947, 26 years before my parents married. This isn't community property. This is family knowledge. Generational legacy. He looked at Diane. And you tried to steal it. I pulled out the other 4 notebooks, placed them beside the first, 1947, 1953, 1961, 1982. My grandfather developed this approach, I said, learned from his father, refined through decades of work. He taught Lloyd Masterson. Lloyd taught Catherine Holder. Lloyd taught me. I opened the 1947 notebook. Inside cover, inscription to me when I was 7 years old. Someday you'll walk these lines. Truth is in the numbers. Catherine leaned forward, read the inscription. Something like recognition, maybe respect, crossed her face. I trained under Lloyd Masterson in 1985, she said quietly. He showed me a young surveyor who knew land better than anyone he'd taught, said the boy had learned from his grandfather. That the methodology was proven over 40 years. That it was knowledge you couldn't teach in school, only passed down through experience. She looked at me. That was you. Tom's nod from January, the silent acknowledgement. He'd recognized Catherine, known she'd recognize the truth. It was all coming together. Every piece, every plant bearing fruit. Your co-developer claim is denied, the state attorney said to Diane. Documentation proves the methodology predates your marriage and originated from generational knowledge transfer. You've provided no evidence of technical contribution. She paused. Additionally, the fraudulent permit applications will be reported to the state licensing board. Diane stood, her chair scraped against linoleum. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in months. I saw her searching for something to say. Some defense, some explanation. There was nothing. The truth didn't need her permission to exist. She walked out, the door closed, the room stayed silent. Catherine gathered her documents. The contract is awarded to Walter Brennan, sole principal. Methodology review, exemplary. Technical competence, proven. She closed her portfolio. Mr. Masterson would be proud. Your grandfather will be proud. The committee members filed out. The community witnesses stood. Bill Weaver shook my hand, said nothing, didn't need to. Mark was beside me suddenly, my son, who'd driven through rain to be here, who'd read grandfather's words and understood what they meant. I'm sorry, he said. I believed her. I thought, she's your mother. You're supposed to believe her. She's a liar, his voice cracked. And you're the most honest person I know. I forgot that. I'm sorry. Pastor Mike approached, put his hand on my shoulder. Truth won, like it always does, just took its time. Outside, spring rain kept falling, washing everything clean. Through the window, I could see green grass, robins in the parking lot, water flowing in the gutters, carrying winter away. I held grandfather's compass. The brass was warm, the weight familiar, 42 years of walking lines, of measuring truth, of trusting that competence mattered. It had cost me a marriage, cost me 3 years with my son, cost me nights alone in a barn office wondering if precision was worth loneliness. But standing there with the contract awarded and the notebooks on the table and my son beside me, some things you can't measure with a compass, but some things you can't build without one. The formal contract signing happened 3 days later. Same building, different room, no audience this time, just Catherine, the state attorney, and me. The pen felt heavier than it should have. I signed my name beside the $1.2 million figure, Walter Brennan, sole principal, no co-developer listed. The licensing board will review Mrs. Brennan's fraudulent permit applications, the state attorney said. Her voice was matter-of-fact, clinical. Given that she filed as principal engineer without proper credentials, they may pursue disciplinary action. I'm not looking to destroy her, I said. You're not. She did that herself. And Catherine closed the contract folder. The permits are public record. The errors are documented. The board has an obligation to investigate fraudulent filings. This isn't personal, Mr. Brennan. It's procedural. Outside, April sun was breaking through clouds. The rain had stopped overnight. The parking lot was drying, puddles reflecting blue sky. Your grandfather taught you well, Catherine said as we walked to our vehicles. Lloyd used to say, the best surveyors are the ones who learn from people who walk the land before GPS, before computers, when the only tools were a compass and mathematics that didn't lie. She paused by her car. You're one of the last who learned that way. Don't let it die with you. I thought about Mark reading those field notebooks. I'm trying not to. She drove away. I stood in the parking lot with the contract in my truck. In 42 years of validation in a government folder. The weight of it should have felt like victory. It felt like survival. Diane's attorney called that afternoon, professional voice, careful language. My client is prepared to negotiate dissolution terms. I assumed she would be. Given the contract award and the outcome of the evaluation, he cleared his throat. Mrs. Brennan is willing to forego business asset claims in exchange for the marital home and her vehicle. And I sat in the barn office. Grandfather's notebooks were still on the drafting table, the compass beside them, spring sunlight coming through the windows. She keeps the house, I said. I keep the business and the land, clean split, no alimony on either side. She signs a release acknowledging no intellectual property claims to the surveying methodology. That's very generous, Mr. Brennan. It's fair. I looked at the notebooks. At 42 years of work spread across worn pages, I'm not interested in punishment, just truth. I'll draft the agreement. After he hung up, I sat there in silence. 28 years of marriage, ending with a phone call and legal documents and division of property, like we'd been business partners instead of spouses. Maybe that's all we'd ever been. Maybe I'd been too focused on survey lines to notice the distance growing. Maybe she'd been building her exit for years and I'd been too competent to see my own blindness. Or maybe some things just end. And trying to assign blame is like trying to survey a boundary that was never properly marked in the first place. The following week, Mark and I drove survey stakes at the contract site. The ground had thawed, soft earth. The smell of it, spring mud, new grass, possibility. I used grandfather's compass to establish the first benchmark, Mark held the transit pole while I took readings, the same way grandfather had taught me, the same way I was teaching him now. I wasted 3 years being angry at you, Mark said as we worked, because you wouldn't sell the land. Because, I thought you were choosing sentiment over practical investment. I hammered a stake into the ground. My personal chisel mark carved into the wood, the mark grandfather had taught me to make. The mark that said, truth was here. The land isn't an investment, I said. It's a record of where we came from, who we were, what we knew. And I straightened. My back ached. 65 years old and still walking survey lines. You can't put that on a spreadsheet. I understand that now. He moved the transit pole to the next position. Mom never did. No, she understood profit, performance, things you could quantify and sell. I took another reading. Nothing wrong with that, just different values. We worked in silence. The sound of stakes being driven, the transit clicking, measurements, called out and recorded. The old ritual, the one that mattered. Tom arrived around noon. Brought sandwiches from the gas station and coffee in paper cups. We sat on the truck tailgate, legs dangling, eating lunch the way surveyors had for 100 years. Heard Diane left town, Tom said. Took a job in Indianapolis. Corporate consulting. Good for her. I meant it, mostly. County's already correcting those fraudulent permits. Nora's been working overtime. He sipped his coffee, made a face. Gas station coffee never improved. You could have pressed charges, made it harder for her. What's the point? The spring sun was warm on my face. First real warmth after months of cold. She lost the contract, lost the business claim, lost credibility with anyone who matters. That's enough. Mark was quiet. Then, that's more grace than she deserved. Grace isn't about deserving. I looked at my son. 3 years estranged, 3 weeks reconciled. Sitting on a truck tailgate, eating gas station sandwiches and learning to use a transit. It's about being able to sleep at night, about not becoming bitter, about knowing when the battle's over. Tom nodded, stood, brushed crumbs from his jeans. Lloyd used to say the best revenge is building something that lasts, something honest, something true. He looked at the survey stakes, at Mark holding the compass like he was learning to read scripture. Looks like you're doing that. After he left, Mark and I kept working. We drove 23 stakes that day, marked the entire catchment basin perimeter, established benchmarks that would guide construction crews when ground broke in May. The sun was setting when we finished. The truck was loaded with empty stake bags and muddy equipment. My hands were filthy. My back was screaming. I felt 65 years old and 23 at the same time. Thanks for coming back, I said to Mark. Thanks for being worth coming back to. We drove home in comfortable silence, the radio off, the windows down, spring air rushing in, the smell of turned earth and possibility. Grandfather's compass was on the dashboard, catching the sunset light, brass and truth, and 42 years of walking lines. Some things you measure with mathematics, some things you measure with time, both tell the truth, if you're willing to listen. 3 weeks later, I sat on the barn office porch at dawn with my coffee. The temperature gauge showed 48 degrees, warm enough for the early seedlings Mark had helped me plant. I opened grandfather's 1947 field notebook, wrote the date, the weather, the first report of progress on the Northeast Water Channel, continuing the work, keeping the record. The divorce papers had arrived yesterday, final dissolution. 28 years, reduced to legal language and asset division. The house was hers. The business and land were mine, clean split, fair terms. It should have felt like losing. It felt like breathing. Mark's truck was in the driveway. He'd moved back temporarily, said he wanted to learn the business properly this time, said maybe precision wasn't stubbornness after all. Yesterday he'd calculated his first elevation gradient without my help, got it right on the second try. Grandfather would have been proud. From the barn, I heard him on the phone with a potential client, explaining survey methodology and language that was his own but rooted in the same truth. The same mathematics that didn't lie. The voice was different. The foundation was solid. The sun cleared the tree line, warming the porch boards. The fields stretched green toward the horizon. New grass, spring growth. The water management system would break ground next month. Stakes already driven, benchmarks already established, truth already documented in measurements that would outlast us all. Grandfather's compass sat on the table beside me, brass catching the morning light. The same compass that had marked truth for 78 years, 3 generations, soon to be 4 if Mark stayed, if he learned. If he understood that some knowledge can't be bought or stolen, only earned through walking lines until your hands know the weight of the brass and your eyes know the land beneath your feet. Catherine Holder had called last week, said Lloyd Masterson's family wanted to donate his field notebooks to the County Historical Society, asked if I'd contribute grandfather's notebooks too, create an archive. Preserve the methodology for whoever came next. I'd said yes. Not all of them. Kept the 1947 notebook, the one with the inscription to 7-year-old me, But the others would go. Let people see how truth gets passed down, how competence builds on competence, how precision matters. Tom stopped by most mornings now, coffee on the porch, comfortable silence. Yesterday he'd mentioned Diane took a corporate consulting job in Indianapolis. High salary, impressive title. Performance over substance. Like always. I wished her well. Mostly meant it. The robin that nested in the barn eaves was singing, spring song, the sound of new seasons beginning, the sound of ice melting and truth emerging and life continuing despite everything. Pastor Mike's words kept coming back. Some battles you fight for yourself. This one was bigger. He was right. This wasn't about winning. It was about proving that competence still mattered, that truth could still be measured, that 42 years of honest work couldn't be erased by someone who'd memorized enough jargon to sound credible. The land remembers who loved it. Grandfather knew that, Lloyd knew that, I knew that, and now Mark was learning it too. The coffee was good. The morning was warm. The compass was solid in my hand. The work continued. Some things you lose to win, some things you win to keep. But the math doesn't lie. The land doesn't forget. And the truth, the real truth, was always in the walking. I stood. The day's survey work was waiting. The lines wouldn't walk themselves. Grandfather's compass went into my pocket, right where it belonged, right where it had always been. Some things you can't measure with numbers. But some things only numbers can prove.